Okay, so my dad absolutely loves James Bond, and because of that, growing up, I ended up loving him too. My childhood was pretty much surrounded by Star Wars, Batman, Spider-Man, and a lot of comic book characters, but being British, James Bond always held a special place in my heart. Though he's often been imitated, there's never been a spy quite like him, and over the last 60 odd years, he's been at the forefront of pop culture. Whether it's the cars, the gadgets, the girls, or the actors that have portrayed him, there's just something about Bond that's eternally relevant. Though times have changed and Bond along with them, he's always been somewhat at the centre of everything, and every 007 movie has been a cinematic milestone. What's strange about this though is that when you look back, Bond has barely even had a character arc. In every movie, he pretty much just ends up going on the same journey, and it took over 50 years before we ever really learned anything about his backstory or his family life. Whilst the actors that preceded him all came and went without really going on an arc, what Craig's Bond did is that it gave us a James Bond journey with a beginning, middle and end. Craig is the first actor ever who didn't leave because he was either recast or because of contractual issues. Craig actually got to close the chapter on his Bond, and now because of him, we know what a quote-unquote final James Bond film looks like. Though the end credits of the movie make it very clear that James Bond will return, we actually now know what it's like to see James Bond die. Now if you're watching this video, then yes, spoiler alert, but it's your fault for clicking a video about the ending of No Time to Die from a channel named Heavy Spoilers. You idiot. Now when I was growing up, me and my dad used to always argue back and forth about if Bond would ever die, and who would be the person to kill him. James Bond has always seemed pretty indestructible, and you might remember that Danny Boyle actually left No Time to Die because he said it would be ridiculous if they actually offed him. So we've known for a while that this was likely gonna be the movie that killed him, but I think it's how they executed it that makes it the perfect send-off for the character. In the movie, we follow Bond as he tries to stop a deadly nanobot virus that has the capability to kill someone in seconds should they have the DNA it's targeting. Throughout the movie, he attempts to stop the villain Safin from releasing this throughout the world, and he also learns that he has a daughter with Madeleine Swan. Up until this point, Bond had very much been the love 'em and leave 'em type, and before we even get the Bond song in this movie, he dumps Madeleine on a train and says they'll never see each other again. Throughout the chase that preceded it, Swan said that she had something to tell him, and though it could be taken that this was her revealing that she worked for Blofeld, you can catch her grabbing her abdomen on the train, which hints that she's carrying his baby. Bond ends up retiring, but he's pulled back into the saving the world business by his friend Felix Leiter before he returns to MI6. Like Bond, Felix is someone who's had many incarnations, and seeing him die very much set the stage for this wrapping up Craig's Bond arc. Eventually, it all came to a head on Safin's Island, where Madeleine and Matilda were both stationed at. Bond broke in with another MI6 agent named Nomi, and he managed to save his family. However, he had to remain on the island to keep the blast doors open so that the Navy would be able to blow it up. During this, he was attacked by Safin, who got nanobots into his system that meant he'd kill his daughter if he ever came into contact with her. It's a completely devastating gut punch to close the final act out on, and the movie doesn't really leave him with many options. However, the movie does give him a closing arc that shows how far the character has come. In the majority of Bond depictions, he's been a cold-hearted killer who would happily leave love behind in order to complete a mission. However, the fact that he was willing to end his own life because he'd rather be dead than live without being able to spend a second with his daughter shows how much the character has changed as a person. Bond, like many of us men, is someone who's probably been a bit selfish and just out for his own ends, but like most of us, he eventually found something to live for. It really does make a difference in life when you go from a self-centered existence to finding meaning, and in this meaning, Bond realized that his life wasn't worth living if he couldn't be with the people that meant the most to him. He's someone who actually found a reason to live, and in doing this, he also found a reason to die. Now, I know the ending of this movie is very controversial, and honestly, when I left the cinema, I wasn't sure exactly how I felt about it. However, having time to reflect on it, I think it actually gave us a definitive ending that makes sense for the character. On top of this, the fact that Bond somewhat dies by his own hand means that there isn't really someone better than him, and he can still go out with his legend intact. There's no one that was able to really beat Bond, and the only time it happened was because he allowed it to. Bond climbs up to the top of the tower on the island, and he looks over the sun as he speaks to Madeleine on his radio. Throughout the saga, Bond was constantly looking over his shoulder, as was Madeleine, but James reassuringly tells her that they're safe now and that no one else is coming. He tells her that in her daughter, she made the most beautiful thing that he'd ever seen. Madeline cries while saying there must be a way for him to survive, which very much feels like it's the voice of the audience, who are no doubt desperate to see Bond make it out of this. In the cinema, even though I knew it was the end, I was still desperate to see him pull a Dark Knight Rises and show up in a cafe or something watching his family live their lives. However, in many ways, that would rob the character of the sacrifice that he's making here. He's not meant to get out of this because he's really giving up everything he has for everyone he cares about. M sums it up when they remember the character, and he says that the function of a man is to live, not to exist. If Bond survived this, he would be existing instead of living, so it makes perfect sense to why he does this. Now, going beyond this, Madeline says she wishes they had more time, to which Bond replies, "You have all the time in the world." This is actually a nod to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, namely the ending scene. In that movie, Bond actually got married, but in the closing moments, his wife was killed in a drive-by shooting. He looked over her corpse and said, "We have all the time in the world," which is clearly mirroring this moment. Whereas his wife died and he had to live without her, his daughter and Madeline are now having to do the same thing. The entire movie in some ways is about fathers and daughters, and we not only see this reflected in Mr. White and Madeline, but also through Bond and Matilda. The movie closes out with Madeline and Matilda driving in the Aston Martin V8 that you might know from The Living Daylights. Madeline says she's gonna tell her daughter a story about a man named Bond, James Bond, and we close out with the song All the Time in the World by Louis Armstrong. Now, I think this closing scene very much sums up Craig's Bond as a whole, as we had things like Judi Dench as M being his boss for his first mission, his first meeting with Felix even though they met in Dr. No, getting the DB5 even though it first showed up in Goldfinger, and Blofeld, that was just a complete mess. However, I think this closing scene very much sums up Craig's 5 films. It very much feels like his arc was a sort of greatest hits retelling of his story, and we saw things like him getting his 007 number, the first time he got the Aston Martin DB5, the first woman he fell in love with, his meeting with Spectre, and also his death. It really brings the entire franchise together to tell a conclusive story about the character that, for the first time, takes him on a real arc. Because of this, the ending is absolutely perfect in my opinion, and it's also the perfect way to end Daniel Craig's Bond. Now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, so make sure you comment below and let me know. I know this scene is divisive, so I'd love to hear if you liked it, or if you didn't. Now, as a thank you for commenting, you'll be entered into a competition right now in which we're giving away 3 copies of Zack Snyder's DC Trilogy on the 30th of November. All you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the movie. We pick the comments at random at the end of the month, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of the movie, which will be linked on screen right now. We go over the whole thing from top to bottom and talk about all the Easter eggs and ties to other films, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know more. If not, then thank you for sticking through this video. I've been Paul, and I hope to see you on the next one. You take care of yourself. Peace.